Phantom Island is a strong effort put forth from King Gizzard for their 27th album, which is accompanied by an orchestral ensemble. This will contain spoilers for the entire album, so stop here if you think you'd like to experience it for yourself first. I'm going to talk through a couple of points on every song, and then share some overall thoughts at the end that pertain more to structure and theme. Phantom Island is a nice sample of the record and a solid title track, providing insight into the instrumental makeup of the album. Knowing that this album is a continuation of songs written during the B741 sessions, this tune picks up nicely with that tone, while ending in a completely new territory that feels like uncharted waters in regards to the band's jamming crescendo accompanied by the orchestra. Dead Stick is a fun track. While it doesn't necessarily fit the tone of the tracks that follow it, but it provides a nice change of pace that makes the experience more memorable. At some points, songs have strange mix levels for the vocals, usually resulting in moments that feel a little unbalanced or too quiet. For example, Joey's first part in Dead Stick is mostly his head voice, but you can hear the chest voice takes beneath, which I think could have provided a stronger floor for hearing the vocals in this section. As for Stu and Ambrose's parts, they just feel a touch quiet, or maybe the horns feel a bit loud in comparison. Lonely Cosmos has a great start that shows a refreshing return to jazzier chord voicings, which fits the island aesthetic quite well. Stu's opening lines feel lonely in the mix, which paints a great image mentally. The instrumental kicks in with a nicely led verse by Ambrose. The end of his verse, however, feels a bit cluttered, which is a trend that will continue for much duration of the album. The following verse also has an odd layer that feels noticeably out of key compared to the rest of the song. I'm not sure how this made it through to the final for something that feels otherwise very polished. Cook's verse also feels cluttered in the song with a couple of off notes. Stu picks up the verse in a way that feels a little more fitting to the song. I think that they could have considered dropping the mic passing technique for some of these songs, even if they were written in the same time frame as B741. The instrumental bridge to Lonely Cosmos is fantastic, as King Giz tends to thrive in short bursts of jams in a minor key. The orchestra fits very well in this section in a way that reminds me of something off Radiohead's A Moon-Shaped Pool. Eternal Return has a brilliant start with vocals led by Cook Craig, which feels beautiful and at home in execution. Stu's verse also follows strongly, showcasing some nice, deep, bassy vocals. Unfortunately, the end of this verse feels yet again cluttered when some space might have been more tasteful. This feeling is reinforced to me by Ambrose, Joey, and Cook's successive verses that follow one after the other without much pause. I think this area could have felt more intentionally crafted if they had stripped back some of these parts and let Joey's outro take them out of the song. This is easily the best section since the very start of the song, where Stu's melodic sing-along lines overlap with Joey's. Panpsych has a really satisfying instrumental with flute that, although not played by Stu, feels very akin to something he might have written for a song from Paper Mache Dream Balloon. There's a great little hint of Ice 5 in this intro as well. The instrumental and vocals are very agreeable to me throughout the song, with Stu and Ambrose's leading vocals taking up just enough space as they interact nicely with the dynamic of the instrumental. Lucas's vocals are nicely integrated just before the shift to Joey's verse as well. Joey integrates some nice callbacks to the silver chord in his verse before shifting into some long notes that feel cathartic and free. Spacesick has a great intro for the first song off side B, opening with a tense and cinematic tone. Stu and Ambrose's verses and choruses feel slightly tacked on as far as how well they serve the instrumental, though I respect their commentary of life on tour. The content is honest and feels wholesome in that regard. Close to the 2.5 minute mark, there's a nice break in a relative minor key before shifting to an ethereal line from Joey. This is easily a highlight of the track for me. The outro is very enjoyable instrumentally, though I feel Stu's outro lyrics feel continuously odd and angular over such a lush section of the track, with a couple of odd layers that feel out of key. While not flawless, this is by no means a bad track. I was more so surprised by the abundance of strange choices made for the song. Aerodynamic continues some of these feelings in a less intrusive way. The orchestra feels natural on this instrumental, and Ambrose's verses feel more at home than they have on the entire album on this song. Unfortunately, Stu's lyrics in the first half of the song feel roughly incorporated, and the song's tone changes without fully committing to any particular feel. Ambrose's more energetic section feels lacking in energy in the mix, and the song picks back up in the remaining minute with a nice spoken-sung outro from Joey. Sea of Doubt is a great track, which starts my favorite chunk of this album. The intro includes a reference to Sea of Trees, which is a song off the band's first album and originally the band's name in the early days of their conception. It feels fitting that the song's themes are of doubt when referencing something such as their alternate band name, though this detail is merely a nice coincidence. The The instrumental and vocals are quite strong throughout the duration of this track, with some light, rough points from Ambrose's heartfelt pre-outro verse. Some of his delivery feels awkward, and the writing itself in this part feels particularly sappy. I usually wouldn't mind this, but for a song called Sea of Doubt, I think they had room to leave space for some more interpretive lines. It at least could have gone a long way in providing some more interesting imagery at the end of the track. Silent Spirit is another excellent tune, showcasing a tasteful inclusion of muted trumpet. This sets the tone so well for the rest of the instrumentation, which is lush and full. Stu and Joey's lines feel nicely suited to the track, with heartfelt parts from Stu and some strange but intriguing vocal delivery from Joey. Ambrose's section yet again feels a touch too much for the space given, in my opinion, but he comes back strong at the end with a callback to Gaia in the bridge of the song. However, I feel his part at the end of the section feels cluttered still when he says, "knocking at the pearly gates." There are so many points similar to this where a line or two is thrown in after it feels like it should be finished. The extended instrumental at the end of the song is a nice switch up from the more standard endings to the songs thus far. Grow Wings and Fly is a particularly interesting song, as it is a direct callback to Shanghai from Butterfly 3000 and a true send-off track that feels like it encompasses the very words goodbye or farewell. I like how equal the instrumentation feels to the orchestra in this track. I think I might be in the minority here when I say I think it was a wise decision not to lean too heavily on the orchestral element of the album for this song. This song feels more core to King Gizzard's sound, and leaving it slightly more open-ended feels like a tasteful approach, versus this song being doubled in length and ever-growing like some of their live renditions of the song on tour leading up to release. This track includes my favorite Ambrose parts on the album, which feel tongue-in-cheek while fitting the tone of the piece perfectly. I really love the way the song ends so quietly. This felt like a very deliberate choice among a plethora of their songs that always tend to end with some sort of bang. This is likely one of my favorite closers to any of their albums for this reason. This album doesn't really act like a sister album to B741, though that was a very forward aspect of this album's conception. I think this might have been a mistake, as it set up an expectation that listeners may or may not lean into. The result just feels a little lacking when something as clear as the album cover depicts this crossover from B741. I had a similar opinion with the execution of Petrodragonic Apocalypse and The Silver Chord, which similarly felt like a half-baked connection across two albums. It would be nice to see them spend a little more effort on making these distinctions clearer. As it stands, it feels more suggestive than intentional, and therefore weaker than letting the record stand for itself with musical and lyrical motifs existing regardless. I also think the track arrangements themselves and the flow of the album could have been more deeply considered on a thematic level. For instance, given the crashed plane from B741 on Phantom Island's cover, I initially thought Dead Stick would have been a more fitting opener depicting the crash onto the island where the ensuing tracks take place. I understand that this has implications for setting the tone of the album, which may be misleading if Dead Stick were first, but it's an idea I think is worth mentioning all the same. I think a lot of people might agree that Dead Stick feels quite out of place on this track list. I'm honestly not certain what an alternative choice could have been because it sticks out so much, but I'm curious to know how they might have thought about it when designing the flow of the album. This is something the band is typically so good at, making feel seamless, and I'm surprised by the route that they took for Dead Stick's placement specifically. As a whole, Phantom Island's sonic makeup and composition is great. Many songs have an interesting bridge or moment that takes a tangent from the core song to briefly explore some other unique element. As far as the moment-to-moment experience, this album is a solid addition to the catalog that I think holds a lot of merit considering their body of work. There are a few moments which leave more to be desired, but this record and the last have shown a nice, from-the-hip writing style that feels reminiscent of some of their best work. The vocals and mix across the record might not be perfect, but the sum of these parts create a surprisingly profound experience from the band that feels like it could be close to their hearts as touring musicians. A lot of the writing feels like direct commentary about life on tour, being away from their families, and overall things that are more rooted in reality than a typical King Gizzard album. Even Stu has said in interviews that this realistic approach makes music boring to him, so it's nice to see how he challenged that notion through the process of writing these songs. And while theming on this album suffers a little from a lack of cohesion, the full experience is still quite enjoyable. Well, that's all I have for Phantom Island. Thanks for watching as always. I'll see you in the next one.